to topic 3. This is a pretty short section, but it's just good to be able to see how you would test classes, because we are going to have to continue unit test. Object-oriented programming does not get us away from unit testing. We need to make sure that our code works. So first thing is I'm going to create a new class because I'm tired of working with that other one. So I'm going to create a new class, and I'm also going to add a value error path in here. This is a nice thing that you can do at times to keep things a little bit cleaner. So this is class book. Again, you can see when I created the class, I used a capital letter on book. And then the first thing, I don't have any class attributes this time. So the first thing here is my init, and it contains publish year, author, genre, and the number of pages. And you can see, just like we can do with functions, I can create a default value for pages. So someone can create an object where they do not pass in the pages attribute, and it'll automatically take on 0. And then I've got a set here that I've created called genre options, and I put like 9 or 10 different possible genres here. And then I've got self.publish year equals publish year, self.author equals author. And then here is where I'm trying to catch if someone attempts to create an object from this class that doesn't have an appropriate genre associated with it. Maybe they did a typo or something. They spelled science fiction, they put sci-fi instead of science fiction. This is a way to prevent dirty data being created by just limiting it to a specified number of possible options. So if genre.lower is not in genre options, then I want it to raise a value error. So at that point, it will stop attempting to create the object, and then it will give the user an error saying they did something wrong. But if everything's fine there, then self.genre will become genre, and then self.pages, I don't want someone to say a book has 340.3 pages. So it's an integer. Pages has to be an integer. So I am assigning that. And then I've got just that str that I've done before, where I have an f string with information about the class, or information about the object. So now I can use the try except when I'm creating the objects from this class. So I'm going to try to create an object called Ender's Game, and it is a type book, and all of the information under here is attribute information, and everything I've done here is okay, but I could accept this if something is wrong and say print something was wrong with your input, please try again. So if I run this, nothing's going to happen because I'm not asking it to put anything to the screen. However, if I put science fiction without a space, that's no longer going to be in the list of available options. And you're going to see it's going to go down the accept path and say something was wrong with your input, please try again. So I've created a situation where I am preventing someone from putting incorrect data in. And here I'm just printing the output just to show, I don't know why I do that, but I'm just printing the object information so you can see the information come out. Okay, so that's the object, or that's the class and the object I'm creating. Now let's unit test that. Here is my unit test that I'm utilizing for this. So first, just like we've done before, import unit test. We always do that. We create class my test case. This is kind of interesting now because you are seeing classes. So some of this stuff will probably make a little more sense, whereas it didn't as much before about why it was structured, why it is the way it is. But I've got class my test case, unit test, all the same as what we've done before. But here, and this was introduced in Blackboard last week, but you may not have seen it or completely understood it. I've got a setup and a teardown. So the way setup works is every time I do one of these groups of tests, setup gets run at the beginning. And every time I end one of these groups of tests, like right here, teardown gets executed. So here, setup gets run, here, teardown gets run. Here, setup gets run, here, teardown gets run. Here, setup gets run, here, teardown gets run. So what this allows me to do is create a clean object for every single one of my groups of tests. And that can be important, especially if you have a really long test suite that you need to run to kind of clean up after yourself so you don't start running into weirdness between test cases. It just keeps everything nice and clean. And also when you're creating objects here, if you're creating real objects, they continue to exist after your tests are done. And that's not always a great thing. So setup and teardown can be really useful. And you can see I use a self dot which makes it so it only exists within the scope of this class. And then the self.eon, and it's a book by Greg Bear from 1985, excellent book. And then at the end, it deletes self.eon, so it gets rid of it each time. So on my first set of tests, I'm going to say, hey, self.assert equal. We've done that plenty of times. But I'm going to say self.eon, which is going to utilize the one that I created here. I'm going to say, hey, is self.eon.publish year equal to 1985, which we know it is, so that will pass. So what I'm doing in this section is for each one of the attributes of my class, I'm going to make sure that the objects created are correct. So I've got the author, I'm checking the genre, I'm checking the pages, just making sure that all those things work as I expected them to. That's where and you can see test value required attributes is a good test name. It tells me exactly what it's doing. It's testing all of those required attributes. Then here, I'm going to make sure that that value error is raised when it should. So I'm going to, in this case, I'm not utilizing my setup up here. I'm just creating one straight up, a variable called test book, and then I'm going to say, hey, make it a book. But you can see I have a genre that's not going to be correct. So that's going to end up raising a value error. So this test will pass as long as this attempt raises a value error, which we know it will. And then this last one here is just making sure that my str output is correct. So, it's self-assert equal, give me the str for eon, the one created within the setup, and make sure that the output matches all of this. So once I've done that, I have run 3 reasonable tests. I've essentially tested the attributes of my class. I've only got one method, but I've tested the methods of my class. Normally, if I had more methods, I would test those as well. And then I've also tested failure scenarios. So this is a pretty decent test coverage. And you know that you always see this at the end, unit test.main, and I've got this junk in here because I'm doing this in Jupyter Notebooks instead of in PyCharm. So when I run this, you'll see that it says it ran test fine, everything's good. So that's a decent test setup. I would suggest you follow something like this when you go and start testing your classes and objects. So that's all I have for today. As always, I will make this notebook available to you within the Get Help section of the module, as well as on my GitHub repo. Thanks.